and welcome to Business Connections. I'm Holly Allen, Director of Marketing and Communications for the Dayton Area Chamber of Commerce, and this is a program produced by the Dayton Area Chamber of Commerce. We're made up of about 2,500 businesses in the Dayton region, and coming up here pretty soon, every one of those businesses will be affected by some new regulations coming through the Department of Labor. And that's what we're talking about today, that rule change. And joining me is Catherine Randall. She's president of HR Insiders, which is an HR firm in the Dayton area. You told me you just opened an office in Cincinnati,
That's correct.
So we are talking about this rule change. I want to thank you for being with us today, Catherine.
Well, thank you, Holly. I'm really honored to be here. I'm also hoping to be able to help your viewers with the Department of Labor changes.
Yeah, that's exactly
it's going to be big.
That's why we wanted you to be here today. Can you give us kind of an overview? And I know it's tough. This is complicated as these rules through the DOL usually are. Can you give us an overview of what this change entails?
Well, the biggest impact, of course, is going to be the salary threshold is almost doubling. So those that were exempt salaried employees making $23,660 are now not going to be eligible unless they're bumped up to $47,476 annually, which is, we used to call it the 455 rule, which for years, too long, obviously, why the change, has been what they had to make a week to be salaried. The first step was you have to make $455 a week. Well, that's going to almost double to $913 a week. So
that's a big change.
That's a huge change, and it's going to take a lot of implementation and adjustment to make sure that you get it done correctly. That also, you know, it's such a huge leap forward, but you got to understand that in the last generation, this is only the second adjustment that's been done. So whose fault is it? I don't know. I mean, I don't know where. I've heard blame going in all different directions, but bottom line, it's a lot easier to take baby steps than to take a giant leap forward, which is now what we're being forced to do come December 1st.
So who does it affect? Is it purely based on salary, or are there some other?
Well, there's always been two parts to what makes an exempt person. I mean, salary is the first factor pretty much. If you don't get to that, if you don't pass that test in most cases, then you might as well not go on. You're not going to be a salaried employee. If you make the minimum threshold, then it goes into the other exemption statuses, which are executive employees, administrative employees, IT professionals, outside sales, which can have a salary, might have a lower salary, but there's a lot of factors that go in that. And you got your highly compensated individuals. And also under the professionals, it's basic science and mathematics, higher learning individuals, or people that take a unique talent like graphic design or arts and music. Those are all factors, and it's never an easy test. I mean, that's why people use HR professionals or study it so much, because I wish we could just say this is person's exempt, this person's non-exempt, but it's kind of the greater good of do they have enough points to be considered an exempt employee.
So it's not just draw a line at that 47,000.
Correct.
It's and below. Now they're eligible for overtime. It's more complicated than that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, white collar workers is pretty much where the premise was set, and that's the non-blue collar, non-labor aspect individuals. And so they have to generally have some test. To be an executive, you have to run a department or a company. Okay. You have to direct the full-time activity or two or more employees. And you have to have the authority or significant input to hire, fire, change compensation, so forth. That, I believe, was probably the number one rule that's used for exemption. But you've also got administrative, which is more of a clerical-based blue collar or white collar position that their duties take a lot of independent decision making and authority, and they have to directly be supporting the employer or the company's direct means of business or its customers.
Okay.
So that's another exemption. You've got the professionals, which I said were the learned professions, or the talented, like I call them, the talented people that I cannot do. IT, it kind of got thrown in there afterwards. I think one, it was such a new field. I think it definitely goes under the learned professionals as well, but it was such a new field. We were always short on hiring qualified candidates.
Okay.
So they became very marketable, very competitive. Their salaries were high.
Okay.
They kept increasing, so they are an exemption. And if they are a computer analyst, systems analyst, anything like that, then if they are working on the application of the systems or the hardware or software.
So they can go into the salary category.
Correct. And again, they have to make, coming December 1st, they have to make a minimum of $913 a week. So I think IT is pretty covered on those other factors. There's a lot of industries with the white collar administrative where people make in the 30 and 40,000s that are no longer going to be. It's going to be a huge significant portion. Over a third, I think, of exempt employees will no longer qualify as exempt.
Who is this going to, the industries, when I say who, I mean what industries will see the most employees affected by this
Well,
change?
primarily any small business is going to, I see a lot of people affected. They tend to be heavily on salaried employee or exempt employees because people have a lot of independent responsibility and control and thought, which is one of the exemptions, but they don't always make as much as they do at larger. We've also got, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so if they have you're talking about those employees who are kind of autonomous in certain ways. So let's say that describes their job description, but yet they still make under that threshold of 47,000.
Then they are no longer exempt.
So then they will be eligible for overtime.
Correct.
Okay, so
and we see the good in that. I mean, with it not being adjusted in so many years substantially to keep up with cost of living, should people be working 50, 60 or more hours a week for less than 23,660, I think it is, probably not. A lot of people are salaried, but do get overtime pay depending on their contract. But this just implements it very quick. It's going to hit really, really hard the retail industry, the restaurant industries, nonprofits, education, schools, religious organizations. Well, that probably goes under nonprofits. But manufacturing, that's another big one. You have a lot of line supervisors, both in, let's say, fast food or manufacturing, that are not going to be near making that $47,000. And depending on what the role is, you've got to decide how you're going to make that adjustment, because I think my organization, HR organization and SHRM, I can't speak for them, but as a member, our fear is when you do something too quick and too suddenly, is it going to cause employers to move everyone to part-time, quit everyone's exemptions, cut benefits to make up for the money they're losing? In that exemption status, we have a lot of clients, we have a lot of people in the area that exempt employees get paid vacation, get health insurance. If they're non-exempt, they will no longer be eligible for those benefits.
So you could have employees who had those benefits previously.
Correct.
And then December 1st, if that's what the employer's choice is, they lose those benefits. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's not a lot of choice depending on how much they're making. You can't just reasonably expect employers to raise someone depending on, the overall profit and size of the business from $30,000 to over $47,000. So how are they going to do it? But if they're counting on benefits for their family, and when that employer paid them that, they probably looked at total compensation. Well, I went ahead and gave them 3 or 4 weeks of vacation to take time off with their family because they want a good work-life balance, or paid holidays, paid vacation, PTO time, whatever it is, very flexible. But that's no longer going to be a factor.
So as our employers sit down, this is coming, which we said December 1st is when this goes into effect, which is coming up really quickly. What are the options for employers who are figuring out what to do with those employees who will go now to being eligible for overtime?
Well, there's 2 prime options that people are thinking at, but I think they're forgetting a third option, which is one I've kind of been promoting if it fits. But the first option is obviously to raise all your salaried employees or your managers, shift leaders, supervisors, admin, sales, everything up to the threshold. So if they make the minimum threshold, you're covered, you're compliant. The second is to demote or reduce them to I shouldn't say reduce, change them over to non-exempt hourly employees. This can be beneficial for the employee. It's all in the communication. I said reduce because I just had a meeting earlier where somebody felt like they were getting demoted, punished. Right. That's why the communication's key. These people are every bit as valuable as they were before they left. We need them just as much, and we have to figure out how to work within the guidelines. I personally, under that first income, I use an example. If you've got employee working $45,000 a year, making $45,000 a year, working as an administrative professional, what's your options? I mean, the simplest one, if she works an average of 50 hours a week, is to bump her up to the 47,476. A basically $2,500 raise, and then you're covered. The other thing is you can divide her salary by her hours that she generally works, and she's going to be happy because she's going to make more than $16,000 extra that year.
Wow.
But employers got to think of that just with adding that time and a half over 40 hours. So what we recommend is figuring out, it's a somewhat complicated formula, but figuring out what this individual makes $45,000 a year. So what does she make an hour that combined with the hourly rate for the first 40 hours and that flat rate at 1.5% for the additional 10 hours. Plus, it does get complicated. You work in the vacation pay, which is not overtime pay, but you want to get as close you can to a base salary. So even though they're hourly, they are still making the same salary every year. Even though they're hourly, they're going to be virtually compensated the same.
Right, so you need to know how many hours over 40 hours a week
your
employees are working.
And that's tough because a lot of it rides on, you're probably not tracking that now.
Right, because they were exempt, right?
Well, exactly, and some places do track overtime, but I think the Department of Labor is going to be a lot tougher on these industries to make sure they're tracking them right. Avoiding them is going to be key. It's a great chance now. You need to audit. Make sure you've got people classified correctly now and in the future. And I think a lot of people are going to have to adjust to paying all compensable time. They may not, with our employees, looked at not just the on-duty work, but the maybe on-call work where you need them, even if they're sleeping, or the working from home. That's a big time. You pay them for travel. You pay them for everything that was all included before now is on the clock time paid. So, if they are going to a breakfast meeting in the morning and wrapping up notes from a meeting that they had all day, all that time over 40 hours in the week is going to be paid at time and a half. And the Department of Labor is going to want to see how you're tracking it.
Right.
So that's a big part. I think it's important to communicate right now. Some of the benefits, like I said, might be cut because we saw that when affordable health care came out. We saw giant employers come out and cut everyone down to a maximum of 32 hours a week. And we saw a lot of blowback from that.
Right.
So because it happened upon us quick, it gets pushed back, but it's all about implementing it right. You saw the poor publicity those companies got and how they had to do it. So I think you need to make a real conversation, with your management team on the best way to make sure everyone's still compensated the same as they are, or is willing to understand any adjustments that need to be made. So I think that's a really big part. Just be prepared and know when their exemptions change, their status changes, letting them know why, and letting them know it's not a choice.
Right.
It's a fact of life, but I think tracking it is going to be the real key.
What have you seen, because I know that you've been kind of traveling around talking to companies about how to implement this. What have you heard from small businesses especially? How do they have plans in place already? If so, what are they looking at as far as options to prepare?
I don't know. I kind of think that this did catch people off guard. It shouldn't have.
Right.
But it wasn't as publicized as we thought. We thought it would get pushed back a little bit. That was what the advocates were fighting for on the HR. So mostly, I have not seen good results right away because it's not understanding, and they're panicked. So they're like, I think I mentioned to you earlier today that they will take away people's management titles, or in a sense make them feel demoted.
What's the risk there?
People will leave. People will not. The culture will suffer. Morale will suffer greatly. People will look to leave to other organizations, and it's just the way it was handled. If you're a quality manager in a pretty high level at a factory, you don't tell them they now need to start standing in line with the people that report to them, clocking in and out. It's perception. It's, just handling it. There's a lot of ways to attack it. Some people don't care. Some people are such team players. But don't just say you're not a manager anymore. It can lose the respect of those working with them,
Right.
Are you going to have a division and an admin and outside sales and IT professionals where some go to hourly and some don't? Well, then clearly people know others are making a different salary than they are.
You're right.
And that's causing a lot of issues. And you got to look at the greater good. The theory behind this is people shouldn't have to work 50, 60 hours a week was the theory for just over $23,000 a year.
Okay.
But
so that was the idea.
That was the
behind all
premise
this.
behind it. And like many things, the premise is good. It's implementing it right and doing it in stages and getting it done.
We've done a little bit at the Chamber because I think you're right that it has caught a lot of people off guard, unfortunately. Kind of came out of nowhere. It's coming up December 1st. So at the Chamber, we have done some work getting the word out. Focus Magazine, which is our quarterly piece, has had a couple of articles.
Yeah.
Thank you. How far ahead of time should businesses be planning? I mean, should they be in the middle of it right now?
Yes.
Or?
Hopefully they're already doing it. If not, now's their wake-up call. Get started. I mean, the very first thing you got to do is an internal audit.
Okay.
When my company does any kind of HR audit, one of the main things we consistently find are misclassified employees anyway. So they're not always there.
Okay.
A lot of people just don't fully comprehend all the steps that are involved, and I think sometimes our government likes things complicated so that you have to feel like you're a brain surgeon to read it. But you've got, just because you call someone a manager or give them authority doesn't make them an exempt employee.
Okay.
So it's going through that, making sure job descriptions are very clear on not just like their duties. We talked briefly about their tested duties, what exemption they would fall under. This person may have been considered to have the executive exemption, but yet they did not. The owner, the company was small enough that the owner made all final decisions, so they didn't really control a budget or a department, or have authority over promotions or so forth, so they would not be considered exempt.
So they have a lot of work ahead
So
of
you
them.
look at that, and you look at who's going to qualify under the new non-exempt, and then you have to put a plan in place. They need to adjust the wages. So how are we going to do it? Are we going to use that formula I talked about earlier? Are we going to raise salary? Is that going to affect benefits?
Right.
There's just too many. We got to review overtime policies. Just because your policy says that people cannot work overtime, maybe without pre-approval,
Right.
that doesn't mean that if they do work overtime, you don't have to pay them. You still have to pay them. I mean, that's a whole nother issue if you want to discuss, them breaking a policy. But
Wow.
you still have to pay them. Review time tracking, analyze workflow. How can we make it more efficient? We don't want to see people getting laid off, but some companies are going to downsize. It's inevitable. So
Unfortunate.
it is, and you got to develop that communication plan now.
Right.
And get it on the board and get people. Everyone is resistant to change, which is why I think I have a company, because if we didn't, yes, and it's good, but if you get them to understand, you get their buy-in, you do right by your employees, they're
Right.
going to be behind you 100%.
So that's going to take some time. Can you talk a little bit? You mentioned that you were hoping that there would be a chance to kind of draw this out a little bit versus it just coming up on December 1st. I know there was a bill introduced in late July to try to give employers a little more time to prepare for this. Do you know where that bill stands?
Well, I believe you were talking about the Workplace Advancement and Opportunities Act. I keep up with it quite regularly through the advocacy team that I'm on with the Society of Human Resource Management. I do know it kind of, last I heard it was dead in the water.
Okay.
But I haven't seen, I even searched before meeting with you to see if I could find some updated. I really haven't heard anything. And the thought behind that bill was not to stop it, but to let's let the Department of Labor analyze this more. You know, is it going to really help anybody or the economy if people lose their benefits or lose their reduction in work hours or lose their jobs, get downside? Businesses may have to close if they're highly dependent on lower paid wages. You know, they may not make it. So, you know, hopefully that's not the case. But they wanted to look at this impact on nonprofit organizations and local governments and all those other ones that I already mentioned as far as retail and restaurant.
That's why it's important to be prepared.
Well, yeah, and you never know. I mean, the hope is we'll kick the can just like we do with affordable health care. We always get one more year.
We've seen a lot of kicking of
yes,
that can.
Yes. So, you know, I want to go just a little bit farther.
Well, can you tell me, Catherine, if now it's obviously important if you're not getting a grasp on this to call someone like yourself who can help you kind of walk through it. But if you're found to be not in compliance with this new rule after December 1st, do you know what might happen to a business owner?
Well, yeah, unfortunately. I mean, we all know we don't want auditors, Department of Labor auditors, knocking at my door.
Right.
OSHA, any auditor. What I usually tell people is auditors are like vampires. They can only hurt you if you invite them in, but they will have to get in eventually. So you best to be prepared. And yeah, I mean, there can be lawsuits. There can be criminal charges.
Wow.
So yeah, private lawsuits or worse yet would be class actions. You'll see employers. I've heard of employers already refusing, saying if you still want to work here, you know, we're going to pay you, but you can't work overtime yet. You're still required to do these other duties that may not fall within that 40 hours. There's not many employers like that, I would suspect. But if that happens, and you know, people should not feel like they're not that they're getting forced out, so they may band together, and lawsuits will happen. Unfortunately, that's a charge. And criminal charges can happen if it's seen to be repeated or willful. If they know they're doing wrong, they haven't fixed it, then there can be up to 6 months in jail, and there could be for the executives there could be $10,000 per incident and fines, depending on how many people work in your retail store, work on your factory floor, work in that executive exemption status. That can be detrimental. Civil fines, there can be civil lawsuits, depending off of that. And so I think just doing it up front and knowing what you're looking at. And you talked about getting someone in there, whether it's your accountant or another business owner or someone that you really understands this. You need someone to go through there, because they do have, I think that the courts take a lot of, or the Department of Labor take a lot of respect out of taking preemptive action. You know, I wasn't sure we were doing it right, so we got somebody in here to go through it. We've started revising our job descriptions. We're making the changes.
To show you're trying to do the right thing and get it taken care of.
Absolutely. I mean, when you asked me earlier if that meant that business leaders could wait, and I said absolutely not. The sooner you start, the sooner you get the word out there, the sooner you start, the less likely you're going to have probably criminal charges, you know, because you're going to know it's not, if you're actively making changes, because you're going to know it's not intentional, it's not malicious in intent. You need to educate management. Management is the one out there spreading the word, and if they're misrepresenting what it is. Where's the budget going to come for implementing this? I did not bring the figures with me today, but they shocked me nationwide on the cost of evaluating the change, communicating the change, and training management and so forth on these changes. So it's a huge deal. Tracking systems need to be established now because
you want to get people used to it. You want to get
not just that, maybe you don't know how many hours they're working.
Well, you're right. Yeah, you talked about auditing.
Yeah.
Making sure you
So how are you going to track the remote employees? I mentioned earlier about people working overtime, even though you may have a policy that says they cannot. But especially if they're salaried or exempt, in the past, they're used to keep up. They check their emails at home. They take phone calls after hours. And a lot of them, there's so many fabulous employees out there that care about their company that, you know, I've heard them say, well, don't pay me. Well, that's not our choice, you know. Or I did that because I care about my customer, you know. We have a lot of, unfortunately, HR issues or accidents or whatever don't come up 9 to 5. So that's part of the deal is, you know, if something happens on third shift, they need someone to talk to.
I think when we started and we said this was complicated, that was the tip of the iceberg. There, we could talk about this for hours.
Yeah, you're right.
I want to thank you, Catherine, for being with us, answering our questions today. I know that there is a lot to look into as business leaders prepare for this change. If you are struggling with this, you want to talk to an HR professional, you can go to DaytonChamber.org. If you click on the Find a Member button, which is on that home page in the upper right corner, you can search by industry and zip code or business name. You can find an HR professional. Of course, Catherine Randall here is with HR Insiders, which is located in the Dayton area. You can also just reach out to the Dayton Area Chamber of Commerce. You can email us at info@dacc.org or call 937-226-1444 and we can help you out. But as Catherine said today, you don't want to wait on this. It starts December 1st, but you need to be preparing for it now if you are a business leader. You can learn more about this and other issues facing businesses and business leaders and the benefits of chamber membership by following us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. And of course, DaytonChamber.org has a lot of information. Thanks so much for being with us. Have a great day.
Our program today has highlighted a very important initiative of the Chamber, Generation Dayton, now celebrating 10 years of active service to our area young professionals. Our intent of this program from the very beginning was to strengthen and mentor our young leaders who would eventually drive our businesses and lead our community in volunteer service and corporate development. I was a proud JC back in my day, but though still around, you don't hear much about that organization, who at the time had almost 8,000 chapters across the nation. So our chamber decided we must do something to fill that growing void in our community. Generation Dayton has always focused on professional development, personal development, and civic involvement. Having our 100-plus-year-old business organization there to help these young professionals grow and remain in our region was our most important objective. Today, the group thrives through active young leaders dedicated to the ideals of a unique organization that builds and strengthens our workforce and leaders. Our employers have embraced the ideals and program since day one, so it is our hope to continue our collective work and have another and another decade of accomplishments through our future leaders. Congratulations, Generation Dayton, on 10 great years serving our community and strengthening your skills and resolve to make the Dayton region an even better place to work, live, play, and serve.